So, my name is Jonas. I'm a software engineer from Germany on a world trip right now. I'm very happy to be here. And I like to talk about constructive procedural content, which is a title that I made up. So don't worry if you don't know what that is. Before I start, he already started. I'd like to ask, who of you are programmers? Okay, and who is an artist? Something else? Okay. Good news is this talk is for all of you. It's not for programmers exclusively. So, constructive procedural content. Probably every one of you know what procedural content is, and we think about stuff like generating dungeons in Diablo or whole worlds in Dwarf Fortress. And there are interesting examples in other genres too, like in Mario, where you can generate platformer levels and then have an AI play that level as fast as possible. Or a recent game that's Galactic Arms Race, where the weapons are evolved procedurally and then shared amongst players. So many different examples of procedural content. And who likes procedural content? Oh, who doesn't like it? Well, why don't you like it?
Some games should not be procedural.
Should not be procedural. Well, I kind of agree to both, because we like to think of procedural content as something fancy and new, and it's interesting for programmers. And it promises infinite content with not infinite amount of development, so it's cheap, supposed to be. But then again, if we look at the examples I just showed you, it's the content isn't really terribly great from an artistic standpoint. Too bad that there are not so many artists here, right? But if you have an artistic vision, it's quite difficult to actually make the content procedurally so that it will fit to that. And from a management perspective, I'd say it's kind of risky, because we don't always know how to make it, where to go, what steps to take. So what I'm trying to say is basically, one does not simply create good procedural content. And as pre-bleeding edge, there's active research going on, and if you are into research, these three guys are probably worth to follow. This is Professor Stanley from University of Florida. He's the one who did the Galactic Arms Race. This is Professor Togelius from Denmark, and he did the Infinite Mario Challenge. And maybe you know Alex Champernard from AIGameDev.com. All of them started in AI and then did various things, and now are basically coming together again in procedural content, because that's the new hip thing. And there are conferences going on. The latest one is on a cruise ship in the Caribbean. So who don't want to be an AI researcher? No. But there used to be a time where these three guys came together in a little town in Germany, and they had a conference there talking about how to improve procedural content, what can be done. And because I'm running kind of out of time, I'm not going to read all of this. This is a very good quote of them. But basically what it says is, you have procedural content like in roguelikes, and it has little finesse. And then on the other hand, you have massively crafted Zelda levels, artists, no procedural content at all. And what you want to make is push these guys in that direction. And my proposal here is, to do that, we basically need one thing, and that is artists. Because artists did the Zelda thing. And now the question is, how do you get artists involved in procedural content? It's not procedural anymore, right? It's artificial then. But I'd like to argue that it's not black and white, that there's a gradient, that you can have like constructive solid geometry where you have an artist doing stuff and you have just noise laid over in different frequencies and you get a nice landscape out of it. And maybe there's something in between, like a sweet spot where there's rainbows and ponies and happiness, and that's constructive procedural content, where you have a tool to manipulate and to work on that noise in an artistic way. Let me give you an example. So there used to be a paper in the GPU jams about density-based procedural terrain. And it's basically just noise. Clever noise, but just noise. How about we approach that from an artistic perspective? So we do the density-based sampling, but as a constructive solid geometry. So let's start with a cylinder. There's a formula for the density of a cylinder, and if you will plug it into a renderer that that renders this stuff, you will get a cylinder by writing that formula. But if you now have tools where artists can manipulate the coordinates of the world, you can squish that cylinder and then make it a bit wider on the ends, and then maybe bend it a little bit, and now it looks like a bridge. So you can create stuff out of simple manipulations, out of transformations, and I'd like to see some tools in that direction. And this is the step where you transfer it from artistic to procedural. You can now add procedural turbulence or noise and stuff on it, because it's still all math. So we have a way to manipulate this procedurally. Actually, it works. It looks like this. I just created that screenshot half an hour ago, so glad I made it. It looks like a bridge, right? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And and then you create assets like that, and you have infinite amount of variations through procedural methods, and you combine those assets into a world where you can still have some artistic vision and then again procedural elements. And you would probably agree a lot that this looks exactly like this, right? So here you go, Subnautica, done. Thanks.